Hi, welcome to the 14-day weather forecast. Things have been very quiet indeed recently, but it does look like a big change will be taking place as we head through the coming days. Let's see. Now, this is the picture at 18 GMT on Tuesday the 14th, and high pressure is still dominating the scene across the UK. There is some patchy drizzle in the east, but most places are dry, and in the short term at least that continues to be the case. More dry weather with high pressure staying close by, damper at times in the east. The change though starts to take place as we head through the weekend. Now there is some uncertainty about the timing of this, but most of the computer models, as I will show you later, agree that a transition will happen. So on this particular animation, which is generated from the GFS data, you can see outbreaks of rain and stronger winds are pushing into the northwest of the UK early on Sunday. But some of the other models bring a band of rain more clearly eastwards through Sunday and into Monday. But on this particular run, what we see is that those wet conditions just steadily sink southwards and eastwards, for winds strengthen as well, and then there are some heavy outbreaks of rain, particularly in southern and central areas through the early part of next week. And it's finishing on Wednesday the 22nd with quite an unsettled looking setup, and there is some colder air approaching from the north. Here's the jet stream and upper air temperature sequence. The UK inside the red circle is covered in orange shading to begin with, so that's relatively warm air aloft. The mottled shaded area, the jet stream, is quite broken and fragmented, so hence the area of high pressure which is dominating things. But that changes through the first week. Initially, as I've already said, not much happens, but later on the jet strengthens, makes its way towards the UK, and areas of low pressure bring that more unsettled weather. So let's see some of the day-to-day details, how things may shape up. Here's a picture on Wednesday the 15th. A little bit of drizzle there in eastern England, but mostly dry, and temperatures similar to how they have been in recent days. About 15 degrees in the south, several degrees lower as you head northwards. And I think there will be a lot of cloud. The best chance of brighter spells is in Wales, the southwest, and maybe in Scotland there. So essentially western parts of the UK could expect to see more sun than the east. And not a great deal changes on Thursday. Maybe a little bit of patchy rain there in the far north, lots of cloud trapped under the area of high pressure, and temperatures similar once more, perhaps a degree or two higher there in the south if the sun breaks through. And on to Friday, it's a similar story, a little bit of patchy rain in the north and the east, bright spells more likely in the west, and temperatures the same story as in previous days. Saturday, and very much a repeat performance, although if you look closely, by the end of the animation on the right there, outbreaks of rain are starting to push into Ireland, and that heralds the beginning of the change to more mixed weather, more mobile weather starting to return. But at this point the temperatures similar once more as they have been throughout the period. And I think it's just worth saying that the overnight lows don't look particularly notable either. But nonetheless, with all that cloud around, it's not going to feel particularly pleasant through the days either. Sunday and Monday, using the data from the GFS, this is where it starts turning more unsettled. So Sunday in the northwest, Monday the outbreaks of rain push their way southwards and eastwards to affect much of England and Wales. I've already mentioned overnight lows, nothing notable. There is a chance of some patchy ground frost. It's a greater risk in the north and the west, where breaks in the cloud could be expected to develop more widely. Here's the mean surface level pressure data graph for York using the XG ensemble. Through the first few days, all of the runs show good levels of agreement. They're very, very closely packed together, around 1,030 millibars. But then from around the 18th, there is a big drop taking place. The runs start to diverge, so differences in the forecast from them. But the general picture is consistent. They all, virtually all at least, are dipping downwards quite sharply. So high pressure is declining. A more mobile weather pattern is beginning to return. That means an increasing risk of rain. So for the first few days, there are virtually no spikes there at all. It's only from around the 20th that their number increases significantly, and that's when it's beginning to turn more unsettled. Low pressure is coming back into the mix. Wind gusts as well would be expected to increase. It's a calm picture early on. This is actually shown the graph for Cardiff, but I could have used a number of locations to illustrate. It's from around the 18th, the 19th, 20th that the chance of stronger winds returns as areas of low pressure move in from the Atlantic. And rainfall as well in the west may be coming back a little bit earlier as the Atlantic returns. But even in the west, it's not, the picture isn't vastly different to the London graph. In more general terms, here are the 5-day accumulations. Using the ECM data on the left, the GFS on the right, virtually nothing across the whole of the UK, maybe just a little bit there according to the ECM in Northern Ireland, and maybe close to the east coast of England, where 1 or 2 millimetres could be accumulated just from that patchy rain and drizzle. But the 10-day charts, what a big change is shown. Significant amounts of rain. The ECM on the left has totals now of between 30 and 70 or even 80 millimetres in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Northern Scotland is seeing less rain. So there are some signals coming through from the computer models that the heaviest rain, at least at the beginning of the second week, the end of the first week, may well be focused on the southern half of the UK. GFS on the right there, quite similar to an extent, although it does have an area of heavier rain in western Scotland as well. But some of the highest totals in the 5 to 10 day part of the forecast period are in southern and central areas. So potentially a big change developing, and I think the deterministic models, more broadly speaking, support the idea. Here is the GFS, Tuesday the 21st. Low pressure there, moving across central parts of the UK. The Canadian model, areas of a low pressure as well. The German icon, fairly changeable or unsettled. The ECM model, so areas of low pressure pushing eastwards, and they do seem to be tracking far enough south to bring those heavy outbreaks of rain to this southern half of the UK at this point, so windy conditions possible too. The artificial intelligence version of the same model, a little bit different, but still an unsettled theme is being shown here. There is the potential for some very mild air to be pulled up from the southwest as these areas of low pressure move in. And finally, the UK Met Office global low pressure, the main area of low pressure perhaps centred a little bit further north than on some of the other model runs, but it's a changeable or unsettled pattern. Another area of low pressure down to the southwest, which is making its way towards the UK. And also on this, that warm air isn't far away from southern counties at all. But all in all, taking the deterministic models together, the message is that changeable or unsettled conditions are expected towards the end of the first week, so significant rain is possible in all areas. Maybe the wettest conditions becoming focused on the southern half of the UK. Temperatures possibly a little bit above the average in bright spells in the south, closer to the average in the north, but the focus very much on that change from dry and quiet conditions early on to wet and possibly windy ones towards the end of the first week. So does that continue as we go through the second week? Of course, at this range, it is just about the general trends and probabilities using the ensemble data. Here is the 16-day GEFS plot for London. Upper air temperatures across the top. Quite a big spread showing up there. Some of the runs going well above the average, a number dipping down significantly below it, and we've actually got 1 or 2 reaching a -5 level at about 1500 metres above sea level. But taking them all together, the thick purple line is close to the thick black line. So the thick purple line is the ensemble mean, the thick black line the 30-year average. With that said, it's a little bit above it early in the period and a little bit below it later. So something of a cooling trend, perhaps a greater chance later on of some colder or at least cooler air feeding into the mix, maybe more of a west or northwesterly tilt in some of the runs for a time. But I think the main point of note here is the rain risk is ongoing through the second week. There are lots of spikes showing up there. There could well be some drier days in the mix, but all in all, it does appear like a big change from what we've seen recently. Heavy rain at times, and that possibility continuing through the second week. The snow row there across the very bottom has reached the dizzy heights of 1. That means that 1 out of the 33 runs is forecasting snow to fall at that time, so somewhere around the 27th or 28th of October. But it's, as we go into the second half of the autumn and through the winter, it's very important to remember, if you look at these snow row values, that they don't correlate necessarily to snow accumulating. It could just be forecasting 1 or 2 flakes of sleet or snow mixed into a heavier outbreak of rain or a shower. I will use snow forecast depth charts when applicable, but the snow row, quite an interesting thing to keep an eye on for various reasons. The artificial intelligence ECM ensemble also shows a transition to unsettled weather. You can see lots of spikes appearing, but with the ECM ensemble, both the physics-based one and the artificial intelligence one, which this is, it's worth remembering, firstly, there are more runs in it than there are in the GEFS, 50 as opposed to 30, hence you're going to see more spikes when looking at the rain forecast or precipitation forecasts. Also, the vertical scale on this is different to the GEFS charts which I'm using. So these spikes look enormous, but if you compare them to the numbers on the left, which show millimeters, and then go back to the GEFS ones, you'll see they are not that different. But the message there is that it's going to be turning more unsettled anyway. It supports the GEFS. In terms of the 2-meter temperatures using the GEFS data tables, some of a downwards trend here. There's a fair amount of orange through the first few days, 16s to 20s. So there is a possibility that we could be pulling up some warm air. As I mentioned, some of the deterministic models were showing, at least into the south for a time. But later on, the amount of orange fades away, yellow becomes more dominant, and also some of the light green shows up. The light green indicating maximum daytime temperatures of between 6 and 10 degrees. The nighttime lows are also trending downwards as we go through the second week. Up to Manchester, it's a similar story. Slightly above average 850 HPA temperatures early on, slightly below later in the period, and the risk of rain is ongoing. The 2-meter temperature data tables on Manchester, a cooling trend through the days and through the nights as well. So temperatures dipping through the second half of the second week, as I mentioned, maybe more of a west or northwesterly tilt in the flow developing, at least on some days. Up to Glasgow, the 850 HPA temperature anomaly here is more clearly defined. It's slightly below the average for most of the second week, and the rain risk is ongoing. There are quite a few big spikes there showing up. So the likelihood of significant amounts of rain in the northwest at times for all parts of the country could expect to see significant amounts of rain through the second week. The 2-meter temperature data tables for Glasgow, something of a downwards trend through the days. It's not very well defined. The nights, though, show an increasing risk of frost as we head towards the end of the second week. Quite a lot of blue appearing in the columns, up to about 32% at the very end, and those are runs which are going below 0 degrees Celsius. Rainfall through the second week, These are the ECM ensemble probability charts, so they show the percentage chance of 5 or more millimetres of rain falling on the first 3 days. The highest risk to begin with would appear to be in England and Wales, particularly in the south and the west. Days 2 and 3 indicate that the risk is transferring more widely into western parts of the United Kingdom. And through the next 3 days, that same distribution is shown. So the greatest chance of significant rain through the second half of the second week, according to these forecast charts, is in the west of the UK. So it does support the idea that weather's going to be coming in from the Atlantic more or less throughout the second week, although there could be more of a west or northwesterly tilt at times, especially in the northern half of the United Kingdom. The mean surface level pressure data table for York, going through the second week here, it's the greens which dominate the columns. Those are low pressure orientated runs, so between 996 to 1010 millibars. Although towards the end of the second week, the amount of yellow starts to increase and there's even a little bit of orange returning. The orange shows runs which are strongly high pressure dominated. So this fits in with the idea of unsettled conditions for much of the second week. Perhaps it's just ensemble spread which is starting to show its hand towards the end there, but it is something worth keeping an eye on. The chance at least that high pressure may start to exert more influence towards the very end of the second week. I think it's just worth noting as well early on there's quite a bit of blue in the columns. Those are strongly dominated by low pressure. So the chance of windy conditions as well as wet at times, especially early on. The GEFS mean surface level pressure snapshot chart for the 24th shows an unsettled picture, low pressure close to the north of the UK, and the European ensemble supports the general idea as well, with low pressure there centred close to Scotland, so maybe a little bit further southwards according to both of these models than is the default, the average, where it's often between Scotland and Iceland. Maybe just some hints that that low pressure could be centred a little bit further, a little bit closer towards the UK, hence the wetter conditions pushing down into the southern half of the UK, at least for a time. So to summarise, week 1, quiet and mostly dry to start, although it will be damp at times in the east. But as we go through the weekend and towards the end of the first week, it turns unsettled, with rain eventually reaching all areas. There is uncertainty about the details and the timing of that transition, but good agreement between the computer models that it will happen. So keep up to date with the short range forecasts. Week 2, unsettled with wet and windy spells, possibly a very wet early on, especially in the southern half of the UK. Temperatures start close to the average, but they dip, particularly in the north. So there we have it. A big change is on the way. The quiet conditions are going to be replaced by more mobile weather, so disturbances pushing in from the west, bringing showers, longer spells of rain, and the risk of strong winds. A very autumnal feel to things as we head towards the end of October. That's at least what the computer models are signalling at the moment. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Then, as ever, if you did, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already. In that way, you'll not be missing any of my future updates. Of course, don't forget as well to stay up to date with the day-to-day developments by checking out TheWeatherOutlook.com website. Thanks very much now. Bye.